Okay, so this is going to be my presentation on academic language and differentiated instruction, utilizing the material in Zwires and Crawford, Tomlinson and McTeague, and Schmoker. So one of the things that Zwires and Crawford bring up is the point of having academic conversations. They can be utilized in the classroom to fortify understanding. They can provide background knowledge, and they can build thinking and build vocabulary. So in a mathematical context, these are very helpful to have at the beginning of a unit, because of the fact that way students can then, through either a pair share or sharing out, share whatever background knowledge they may already have bringing into the unit. And then also throughout the unit, as vocabulary is being utilized, conversations can be had with the students and between the students as to ways in which they would use the vocabulary in their real lives, or other ways that they can reword the vocabulary so that they truly understand it rather than they're just memorizing definitions. Other perspectives can be garnered through academic conversations. Students can learn how to develop empathy with others, just by seeing different perspectives, and it can definitely increase engagement. Research has been done to show that by students talking more about the subject, more about the math, even if they're not talking about it correctly, at least they're being engaged, and that way either other students or the teacher can thereby redirect anything that they happen to say that might not be the most correct. One of the ways that students can talk about academic language is use background knowledge of the text that they're reading and use text clues. One of the things that is often a struggle for students is word problems, and one of the big reasons why is because students are looking for just equations rather than trying to interpret what the information means or what can be brought based on other words in the problem, what can be brought to the problem in order to solve it. So Zwires and Crawford also talk about varying instructional methods and strategies. It's important to provide alternate entry points to instruction. This is definitely a way of differentiating and providing things. There's students that feel like they're visual learners more so than students that feel like they're auditory learners, and so different entry points can allow different students to gain different perspectives on the same information. There's different formats for grouping that we can use. In the class that I have, students are put into small groups of fours, and so they're encouraged to have conversation about steps and procedures and develop a deeper conceptual understanding about the material. From that, we can have large group discussion, get the whole class involved. Sometimes some of the students are a little bit shy or need some prompting to discuss, but what they often have to say is very insightful. And so getting them to talk and use academic language is very helpful, not just for themselves in building confidence, but also for the whole class to hear what they have to contribute. One of the things that is important is that students get an idea of how to assess themselves. Teachers often give assessments that students just feel are only about grades rather than about actual progress. So if students are able to set goals on, oh, how much vocabulary was I able to use this week as opposed to how much vocabulary was I able to use last week, if teachers use discourse moves such as wait time or revoicing, it can also create time for students to think and reflect on what they've been doing. If students compare some of the things that they've been doing, they can compare, oh, how did I phrase the answer to this problem? One of the things that students are being asked to do these days in math is when they solve a word problem, write it in a sentence to relate it back to the context of the word problem. And if they're maybe not as adept at the academic language as they should be, they can compare their work with other students, get an idea of where they should be. Schmoker's big phrase is making math meaningful, and one of the things going back to this previous text about students comparing their work, they can say, oh, well, was the answer meaningful? Did it have meaning related to the word problem, or did it have meaning to the actual life? One of the things Schmoker is a big fan of is that it's harmful to call on students who raise their hands. Oftentimes, and I've seen this day in and day out, the students who are the most confident or doing the most well in the class are the ones who are most ready to raise their hands. But the ones that don't raise their hands, oftentimes they're either, at the very least, they're shy. At the very most, they don't fully understand, so they're they don't want to raise their hands because there's not a class culture where mistakes are okay. As a teacher, we need to do what we can to change that, but it's often easier said than done. Schmoker also has thoughts on how a curriculum should be found. Going to my third point, he strongly believes that there should be a balance between teacher guidance and student construction of meaning. He has no problem with students struggling in problems, but he definitely feels that if students struggle for too long, they're going to give up. They're not willing to kind of keep going. And so by students making sense of the meaning, they're able to learn the basics and get a better grapple of it. But if students are trying to think at high levels, they're going to require a little bit more guidance from the teacher, and that's okay. One of the things Tomlinson and Mateague say is that students should be uncovering the content and using essential questions in teaching. Essential questions are things that the teacher can say where they are less focused on a right or wrong answer and more on what is your thinking. They are focused on being open-ended and providing opportunities so that students can go ahead and process what the procedures might be, what the concepts might be, without feeling pressured to have to get the exact answer that's being sought after. Also, grading. Grading might not initially relate to academic conversations or differentiated instruction, but it's very necessary for students to feel comfortable when being exposed to both academic language and differentiated instruction. If there's not clearly specific learning goals, students are going to go ahead and try to decide whether or not they are actually understanding the material. If there's not evidence that's valid, then the discussion that they have is going to be very subjective, unless the teacher goes ahead and says, these are the words that I want you to use. It might even go ahead and be put on the board as, these are the words that need to be used while discussing this idea. It's also established criteria by putting it on the board so that all students can see what's going on. Grading should reflect growth, and not just necessarily formal grading, but informal grading, informal assessment should reflect growth and focus on achievement so that students are willing to risk a little bit and put themselves out there so that they are able to feel safe using their academic language and discourse.